Good morning everyone and welcome to week 4. This week our topic is the C word in Australian education, class. The idea that we're not supposed to have in this egalitarian country of ours. However, from the chapter, from the stuff we've been looking at and the youth work, etc., it should become reasonably apparent that there's a lot of evidence over a long period of time that the family background that kids come from has an impact on their future educational success and their future role in the economy and society. Now, the sad thing is we've known about this connection for about as long as we've been looking at this data and been studying education. So it's a phenomenon that's pretty sticky. We don't want to get into the full sociology of class. We're not doing a sociology unit of class. What I need you to understand for this unit is that people come to school with different experiences and expectations and different relationships to what we do in school. A lot of what we do in school, we might say, is informed by middle-class Anglo values. Even things like sitting down in the classroom for that period of time without moving is a set of values that is normal to some social groups and not others. If you grow up in a family where you sit at the dinner table, talk and discuss and contemplate and ask questions and critical questions, you become more and more used to that sort of behaviour. But if you were in a family that doesn't have those discussions, is involved in forms of manual work, is outside doing practical activities more, then it's a foreign environment to sit in the classroom thinking abstract ideas and concepts every day. And we can't assume that kids have that background. A couple of key concepts that we use to think about these that I want to introduce you to. The main one we're going to use is called the virtual school bag, which comes from Pat Thompson. Basically the notion here is that students have learnt things at home and with friends and in the family and the world they live. And they bring that knowledge with them to school. It's like their virtual school bag, virtual backpack is with them always. We're not talking virtual in the IT sense. This concept predates the IT movement. But it's what they have. And it's based on research that shows that the knowledge that we master in schools is not the knowledge that everyone is doing in their society and their communities. And the chapter goes through that in more detail for you. Now, I should say, this research has been around for a long time. I'm not going to go through the history of all the research. Should you wish me to add some of that research to make these arguments, I can happily do that. I just see the chapter as being adequate enough with some of the extra papers we've got here. A concept related to the virtual school bag that Pat Thompson draws on is funds of knowledge. And this is basically the historical and culturally accumulated knowledge that students have. What they found in this study back in the 80s was that in these communities that were mainly Mexican Latino migrants, that they had a whole lot of knowledge. They were cooking, doing shopping, doing maths and a whole range of stuff, but that wasn't what had to happen in school. So again, they were coming with knowledge to school that wasn't valued in school. And there's plenty of anecdotes we could use to unpack and explain these connections. I use the virtual school bag and funds of knowledge because these are the original references. There's been gazillions of work since they come back to these ideas. I like to use the original papers. Another key theorist that you'll come across is Pierre Bourdieu. Now, Bourdieu is a very influential theorist in education, French theorist. Of course, like all these theories, there's always critiques and debates, but I think Bourdieu offers the most easy accessible and it's been longly used interpretation of these issues. And basically what they are is that there are different capitals that we have in schooling, in society even. So there's economic capital, so some people have more money, they can have property and shares and income, and they can use that to convert to opportunities, to buying schooling, buying other activities in society, buying jobs. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But then there's the social, cultural and symbolic capitals, which are a little bit harder, and these are the sort of hidden curriculum issues that exist in schools. So the social relationships and acquaintances that people have is the social capital. Who do you know and who can you draw on? What we're talking about here are things like if your world is only people who work in, for example, the trades, you don't share the world with lawyers or doctors. And we know that children's aspirations and later careers are highly related to those people who they interact with. Okay, it's a bit hard for a child to imagine being a lawyer if they've never really engaged with one. The reason why nursing and teaching has been the primary pathway for post-secondary education for people from backgrounds that didn't have a university history is that they've interacted with teachers and nurses. They can understand what that's like. So here in schools, we want to introduce people to a wider range of experiences and jobs and opportunities than they might have normally had. This is why you see students walking around the university, at school, etc. And why we talk about work experience and connecting people in society. Cultural capital, the way of carrying oneself, is another important aspect, and that's that idea of fitting in. So you might have experienced situations where you've been in a context or an environment that's not your normal one, and you don't feel they really fit in. Educationally, the cultural context comes through in terms of the assumptions of knowledge and schooling. A lot of our literature, a lot of the examples we might use as teaching, all assume pretty much a sort of middle-class, urban, Anglo-cultural background. If you don't share the cultural background, you don't understand the predeterminants of the curriculum. A little example I use is a new teacher that came to my daughter's school from a school in Sydney where she had very high ICSEA students. And on her first day, she asked the students to see what their writing was like. So I asked them to write about a new ending for Cinderella. Now, she wanted to test their writing. The medium was Cinderella. The problem was half the class at my daughter's school, a very mixed school, didn't understand what Cinderella was. So I read to my daughter, she reads fairy tales, Cinderella was something easy, she can go with that. But half the class was like, who on earth is Cinderella? What's going on here? Because they don't read and their parents don't read. Okay, so we can't make these sort of assumptions that they have that knowledge. That's one example. We could go on. Symbolic capital is also status, prestige and power. So this is what people are often buying into with certain forms of schooling. They're buying access to status that comes with that, or they're getting into subjects that have certain status. It's that idea that some things are powerful in society, and that gives you opportunities. It's not just higher education, so it could be creatives are particularly symbolically powerful, arts, music, etc. They hold a place. There's a reason why a lot of schools on the top end of the elite spectrum have large arts and music halls, for instance. Okay. Now, the key message of these capitals is they come together as part of the funds of knowledge and they inform the virtual school bag. Okay. Wealth, yes, you might have resources in your school that you can draw on, and some schools will have parents that have more wealth than others who provide more money to the P&C to buy more resources. Okay, that's one thing. The social and cultural stuff, well, that underpins assumptions in the curriculum. Okay. Look at the examples in your maths textbook or your literacy textbook or your science textbook. Okay. They're not familiar to everyone. In my rural work that I do, we're always getting kids talking about the examples in the books make no sense, about train timetables and beaches and whatever else, okay, or even cities. So we've got to be mindful of these mediums here. Bourdieu's got other ideas that relates to this. One is habitus, which is basically the way you carry and hold yourself. Okay, so these capitals come together into the habitus in Bourdieu's theory. So they're the things that make class background identifiable. So when you're walking down the street and you see someone, you sort of go, oh yeah, they're having it rough, or they're a bit on the top end. It's these ways and dispositions that inform that. Okay, it's that habitus, the way they speak, the way they talk, knowing how to behave in a certain situation, being able to converse around either theatre or rugby league. Okay. These are things about belonging and connection, and they then link to those social status issues. But we're not doing a course on Bourdieu. The next couple of slides about Bourdieu I won't worry about. There's some other ideas there if you want to look into a bit more of Bourdieu. I'm going to keep these short. The next slide here is just to reinforce what I was talking about in terms of social background. So here we have a graph, like many, which shows that we have an issue in Australian schooling where this is Year 9 NAPLAN, this is the national mean, and 1,000 ICSEA, the average ICSEA, and you can see that school students are grouping. So yellow is the government, green is independent, blue is the Catholics in the middle, and the red are in New South Wales, this data are the selective government schools. Interesting that selectivity, high IQ, aligns with high social background. A bit questionable. These sort of graphs are just reproducible. It shows that the school links to higher NAPLAN, but the students in the school also have higher social background. So what's the main determinant here is social background. The school just reflects that. A couple of other things that I'd like you to have a squeeze at is Jean Annion's notion. So this concept here, pretty comes through that cultural capital notion, but Jean Annion is a classic study. There's Alan Luke's study that's referenced here too. Again, I go back to the originals, all right. But knowledge and where it exists. Key thing to remember is in more, say, working class backgrounds, knowledge exists in books and teachers. And you master it and you learn it and you reproduce it. Okay? That's the relationship with knowledge. Okay? If you think about vocational work or trades, etc., they are about the application of known knowledge. As you get up to the high end here, knowledge exists in books and traditions, but understand that knowledge exists in disciplines, or more importantly, that you can test knowledge. Okay? So rather than repeating it, it's here critiquing and testing knowledge, saying, why is that so? Does it work in this situation? What if I do this to it? The idea that it can be manipulated. That's into the higher end of Bloom's, the creative, the critical. So different relationships to knowledge. That predisposes different success in school subjects, because it's not about mastery of that subject, it's about understanding the basis of the subject to critique it and use it in new ways. But that's not a relationship that everyone has with knowledge. A couple of slides here just show that in some examples. They're straight from the paper. Have a squeeze at the paper. Last one here is Deb Hayes' study. Look, again, out of the paper, the key point is, looking at these schools in challenging circumstances, she showed that schooling is pretty boring for kids. They go from lesson to lesson to lesson to lesson, doing the same teacher-centered worksheet or textbook activity. There's no critical engagement with knowledge or creativity or student agency involved. It's a whole lot of repetitive organisational or management of behaviour type activities. Okay. Now the rest of the things are just a few extra references, other points to have a look at. Haberman just talks about pedagogy of poverty. So in urban teaching, which is in our working class communities in Australia, again, another classic study that gets reproduced, that students basically end up thinking, thanks to the Hayes type approach stuff, that sort of stuff is good teaching, and when teachers do other things, that's bad teaching. So they get conditioned into believing what we know is bad teaching is actually good, and then trying to change that becomes really problematic. We'll come back to Bernstein, who talks about curriculum pedagogy and evaluation as being the important things in schooling. And these little graphs here are just some unpacking from Stephen Kemmis, going back to some earlier work by Connell, about how this sort of poverty cycle works. But again, that's explained in the textbook, so I won't go through it here. Key thing I want you to think about going ahead here is, look, we could talk a whole unit on how class reproduces stuff in education. There's a degree of I'm saying, take my word for it. If you want me to convince you, I can do that in more detail. We know these relationships exist. These are some of the theoretical tools that have been useful in interrupting and engaging with these issues. There are all of them, and they're certainly always debated and critiqued, because if you go back to the very first week of the course, ideology influences this. Okay? If you have a sort of traditionalist or classic liberalist type notion, the idea of class is sort of, we don't talk about that. It doesn't exist. It's about how you apply yourself. But we know historically that hasn't changed educational achievement. Look at the recent NAPLAN, 10 years of NAPLAN, okay? Been doing it in Australia for 10 years, we've hardly improved at all. Okay, so these interventions that we have thinking how to change things don't really have that effect. But we'll get to a whole bunch of studies in coming weeks. What works, what makes a difference for kids, shown in this work by Kemmis, we call this diagram, based in the virtual school bag stuff that Pat Thompson did, okay, shown in some of the stuff that Alan Luke and Jean Annion have talked about, is that when teachers teach with the backgrounds and knowledge of students as they come to school in mind, they improve their learning outcome compared to when they don't. So if you're starting your lesson thinking, right, here are my examples, this is what I know, this is the assumed norm, you're going to miss half the kids. And it's not just your Piagetian approach where you look at the cognitive level of the children and trying to meet the cognitive levels in your classroom differentiation. It's also a knowledge differentiation. These students come from X background, have these interests, have this understanding of these concepts. Okay. Another group of students might have different understandings of these concepts. Take my daughter's example. If you're teaching my daughter, she has some experiences in her life that are very different to others in her class who don't travel, aren't mobile, who have a single mother family, who don't have a lot of income. So how are you drawing on both of those student knowledges in class to ensure they both learn? That's what we know works. That's drawing on the virtual school bag. That's drawing on their capitals. We're not going to change the cultural basis of the curriculum. What we can do is give people more people access to it in a pragmatic sense and improve achievement within that pragmatic sense. Now, maybe you could say we want to debate the curriculum, change the basis of knowledge. It's not going to happen in a pragmatic sense in your classroom this year or next year. That's a long-term project. So what you can do right now is work with these tools and how you would engage with those with the subjects or the cross-curriculum areas you're teaching now. And that will do for today.